In the shadowy world of Cold War Britain, paranoia wasn't just politics, it was cinema. The 1970s produced a wave of British spy thrillers that blurred the line between patriotism and betrayal, truth and manipulation. Yet, most of them vanished, lost to time, censorship, or studio fear. What happened to these forgotten gems? Let's uncover 15 British spy thrillers of the 70s that history tried to erase. Number 15. The Internecine Project, 1974. Released in the middle of the Cold War paranoia boom, the Internecine Project was marketed as a stylish, cerebral thriller. Part espionage puzzle, part moral nightmare. James Coburn plays Robert Elliot, a smooth-talking political scientist poised for a major government post. But behind his charm lies a web of murder, manipulation, and blackmail. The film's premise is chilling. Elliot orders 4 of his own agents to kill each other, each unaware they're part of a deadly chain reaction. No car chases, no explosions, just intellectual brutality. Critics called it cold-blooded espionage as chess, while others found it too bleak for mainstream audiences. Rumors spread that the British Board of Film Classification pressured the studio to tone down its political parallels, particularly its cynical portrayal of government power and academic corruption. Some whispered it mirrored real operations connected to MI5 and Cambridge spies, making it quietly dangerous. Behind the scenes, Coburn clashed with director Ken Hughes over tone. Coburn wanted cool detachment. Hughes wanted moral panic. Their tension bleeds into every frame, creating an atmosphere both claustrophobic and hypnotic. By the late 70s, the Internecine Project was barely screened, largely forgotten amid Bond mania. But modern viewers see it as a prophetic study of bureaucratic evil, where every handshake hides a knife. It asks, when loyalty becomes strategy, who survives the endgame? Number 14. The Mackintosh Man, 1973. At first glance, The Mackintosh Man looked like a safe bet. Directed by John Huston and starring Paul Newman, it promised prestige espionage. But beneath its glossy exterior lay a disillusioned post-Bond world, one where spies weren't glamorous, but disposable. Newman plays Reardon, a British agent infiltrating a diamond smuggling ring to expose a traitor. Yet, unlike the suave heroes of his era, Reardon is weary, cynical, and morally adrift. The pacing is quiet, almost too quiet, reflecting the bleak tone of 70s intelligence work. When the film premiered, critics were baffled. Audiences expecting action found slow-burn realism instead. Houston's decision to shoot on real British prisons and government sites caused headaches for censors. Some scenes were deemed uncomfortably close to classified imagery. There were even claims that Huston had consulted ex-intelligence officers, giving the film a texture too authentic for comfort. Production was tense. Huston's stubborn realism clashed with Warner Bros. Demands for excitement. Newman later admitted he never fully understood what his character was fighting for, a line that unintentionally captured the film's existential soul. The Mackintosh Man faded from theaters within weeks, but today it feels hauntingly relevant, a reflection of Cold War fatigue where even heroes question if the cause is worth the corpses. Its quiet despair reminds us, sometimes the loudest lies are whispered in rooms of power. Number 13. The Human Factor, 1979. Directed by the legendary Otto Preminger in his final film, The Human Factor was based on Graham Greene's morally complex novel, and it dared to expose the human cost of espionage. Released just as the 70s ended, it served as both epitaph and warning for a genre that had lost its soul. The story follows Morris Castle, played by Nicol Williamson, a mild-mannered MI6 officer caught between duty and conscience. When a Soviet mole leaks information, suspicion falls on Castle, whose loyalty is divided by love for his African wife and his disillusionment with British colonial politics. Audiences expecting intrigue got introspection. The film traded gunfights for guilt, codes for conscience. Preminger's decision to highlight Britain's racial hypocrisy through Castle's mixed marriage provoked discomfort among conservative critics. Some outlets refused to advertise it, calling it unpatriotic. Behind the scenes, the production nearly collapsed due to financing issues. Distributors were nervous about its anti-establishment tone. Green's script revisions were reportedly too political, and several scenes hinting at MI6 racism were softened for release. Upon its debut, it flopped, overshadowed by louder, flashier spy fare. But over time, the human factor became a quiet classic of moral espionage, a story where the greatest betrayal isn't against a nation, but against one's own humanity. In the end, it left us with a haunting truth. Spies don't just hide secrets, they bury their souls. Number 12. The Black Windmill, 1974. The Black Windmill was supposed to be Michael Caine's triumphant return to espionage, directed by Don Siegel of Dirty Harry fame, with a script promising grit, realism, and betrayal. But what audiences got was something darker, stranger, and more personal. Caine plays Major John Tarrant, an MI6 operative whose young son is kidnapped by terrorists demanding the release of secret arms data. When his own agency suspects him of treason, Tarrant is forced to go rogue, navigating a maze of double agents and internal deceit. Critics at the time didn't know what to make of it. The film avoided explosions for long silences, bureaucracy, and moral exhaustion. The tone was unrelenting, paranoid, and bleak. Some reviewers called it the anti-Bond, while others dismissed it as too cold for comfort. Rumors circulated that Siegel's original cut was heavily edited by Universal Pictures after British officials objected to depictions of corruption inside MI6. Allegedly, several scenes showing government incompetence and political cover-ups were removed before release. Behind the camera, tensions ran high. Siegel and Caine reportedly clashed over how far to push the character's emotional breakdown. Caine wanted raw despair. Siegel preferred icy restraint. The result is a haunting hybrid. Emotion barely contained, like a pressure cooker ready to blow. The Black Windmill underperformed, vanishing from theaters within weeks. But decades later, it's now hailed by scholars as one of the most realistic portrayals of British intelligence during the 1970s. A film about fathers, governments, and loyalties that can't be trusted. Its message lingers. Sometimes the enemy isn't across the border. It's the institution that signs your paycheck. Number 11. The Quiller Memorandum, 1972 re-release. Though originally released in 1966, the Quiller Memorandum returned to British cinemas in the early 70s, rediscovered by a new generation of audiences drowning in Cold War anxiety. By then, it had gained a reputation as one of the most cerebral spy films ever made. George Siegel plays Quiller, a British agent investigating a neo-Nazi organization operating in post-war Berlin. What follows isn't a mission, it's a psychological dissection. Quiller moves through empty streets, abandoned schools, and moral voids. There are no gadgets, no bravado, just silence, paranoia, and manipulation. The film's political commentary proved too daring for its time. British censors initially demanded edits to scenes implying Western government's complicity in protecting ex-Nazis. Even in the 70s re-release, the BBC refused to air it uncut, calling it politically inflammatory. Behind the scenes, the production was just as intense. Harold Pinter's screenplay, sparse and elliptical, infuriated producers who wanted action. Siegel later admitted he didn't understand the dialogue until months after shooting. Yet Pinter's writing made the film timeless, echoing the paranoia of real MI6 operations gone astray. Audiences in the 70s connected to its alienation, the feeling that espionage had become existential. No longer about nations, it was about identity and truth itself. The Quiller Memorandum is now a cult masterpiece, often cited as the thinking person's spy film. It whispers what every operative knows but never admits. The deeper you go, the less you recognize yourself. Number 10. The Odessa File, 1974. The Odessa File exploded onto the British scene as a pulse-pounding revenge thriller with political teeth. Based on Frederick Forsyth's bestseller, it told a story too close to truth for comfort, and one that the British and German governments reportedly tried to downplay. John Voight stars as Peter Miller, a young journalist in 1963, who stumbles upon the diary of a Holocaust survivor. The entries reveal the existence of Odessa, a secret organization of former SS officers plotting to rebuild Nazi power. Miller's investigation becomes a descent into moral darkness as he infiltrates their network, blurring the line between justice and obsession. The film was a hit, but a controversial one. When it premiered, several European television outlets refused to promote it, claiming it incited anti-German sentiment. In Britain, certain scenes depicting British intelligence cooperation with ex-Nazis were quietly trimmed from early prints. Behind the scenes, director Ronald Neame battled studio interference. Forsyth's original ending, more morally ambiguous, was softened at Universal's insistence. Voight reportedly fell ill during filming, forcing key sequences to be reshot with doubles, adding to its chaotic legend. Despite these struggles, the Odessa File struck a chord with audiences who sensed it was exposing more than fiction. Its depiction of secret networks protecting war criminals echoed real post-war scandals in both Europe and Britain. Today it stands as one of the decade's most enduring spy thrillers, a reminder that evil doesn't vanish. It hides in bureaucracy, waiting for history to forget. Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones that survived the war. Number 9. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, 1970 reissue. By the dawn of the 70s, British audiences were weary of polished espionage. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, originally released in 1965, was revived for a new generation and hit harder than ever. Its return in 1970 captured a mood of exhaustion, betrayal, and Cold War futility that mirrored real life. Richard Burton stars as Alec Leamas, a jaded British spy sent to East Germany for one final mission. What begins as a revenge plot soon unravels into a grim exposé of political deceit, where both sides manipulate truth until morality collapses. Critics praised its re-release, but the government wasn't amused. Rumors swirled that British intelligence officials privately complained about how accurately the film depicted recruitment tactics and disinformation operations. Some screenings in military towns were allegedly discouraged from promotion, as the film's cynicism clashed with Britain's official narrative of noble service. Behind the scenes, Burton's personal life fueled the film's tension. He was drinking heavily and feuding with director Martin Ritt. Yet that exhaustion gave Liamas his soul. The re-release trailer leaned into that realism, promising a spy story for those who know the cost of loyalty. For a new decade drowning in distrust, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold became an anthem for disillusionment. It wasn't about gadgets or glory, it was about moral corrosion. It remains a haunting reminder. Sometimes, to survive the Cold War, you had to lose your humanity first. Number 8. The Fourth Protocol, 1978 early concept film. Before the famous 1987 adaptation with Michael Caine, The Fourth Protocol existed as a little-known BBC co-production, an early attempt to adapt Frederick Forsyth's explosive novel before studios deemed it too politically risky. This version, produced in 1978 under working title Project Aurora, was nearly complete before it was shelved. The story revolved around a Soviet plot to smuggle nuclear components into Britain and detonate a bomb near an American base, an act meant to destroy NATO without firing a shot. Filmed under tight secrecy in Scotland and Berkshire, the production faced interference from both sides of the Atlantic. Britain's Ministry of Defense allegedly objected to the depiction of nuclear weapons storage, and even withdrew location permissions mid-shoot. The BBC, fearful of Cold War backlash, buried the project. Only rough cuts and partial scripts survived in archives until rediscovered decades later. Insiders claim the film was eerily accurate, reflecting real MI5 concerns over Soviet sleeper cells and illegal intelligence operations in the late 70s. Its director, Peter Duffel, never worked in espionage cinema again, his career derailed by controversy and unspoken pressure. Though Project Aurora never reached screens, its DNA lived on in the later, sanitized Fourth Protocol adaptation. Its disappearance is a cinematic ghost story, a reminder of how even fiction can tread too close to classified truth. Number 7. The Day of the Jackal, 1973. One of the most meticulously crafted thrillers of its era, The Day of the Jackal remains a British-French masterpiece that defined realism in spy cinema. Directed by Fred Zinnemann and adapted from Frederick Forsyth's best-selling novel, it chronicled the hunt for a faceless assassin hired to kill French President Charles de Gaulle. Edward Fox played the Jackal, a cold, methodical professional who turned assassination into a science. His performance was chillingly restrained, less villain than instrument of destiny. Unlike most thrillers, the film revealed the killer's plan from the start. The tension came from watching perfection meet inevitability. Though critically acclaimed, The Day of the Jackal faced sharp censorship in several countries. In Britain, censors reportedly demanded the removal of specific firearm assembly sequences, fearing they could serve as a manual for real assassins. Some governments even attempted to block its export. French intelligence officials called it a procedural too precise for comfort. Behind the scenes, Zinnemann's perfectionism bordered on obsession. Every newspaper headline, license plate, and clock was historically accurate. Fox was trained by former intelligence agents to mimic spycraft realism without glamorizing violence. The attention to detail both fascinated and frightened studios. One executive famously remarked, "It's too real to be fiction." Decades later, it stands as one of the most influential spy thrillers ever made, redefining authenticity and restraint. Its legacy whispers the ultimate espionage truth. Real danger hides not in chaos, but in precision. Number 6. The Kremlin Letter, 1970. Released at the dawn of the decade, The Kremlin Letter was John Huston's brutally cynical vision of the espionage world, so bleak and morally inverted that audiences and critics recoiled. At first glance, it seemed like a stylish spy ensemble film featuring Patrick O'Neill, Orson Welles, Max von Sydow, and George Sanders. But beneath its cold exterior was a story about corruption, betrayal, and moral decay masquerading as duty. The plot follows a young naval officer recruited into a covert network of spies sent to Moscow to retrieve a stolen letter that could ignite nuclear war. Yet every agent harbors their own secret agenda, and by the end, loyalty, patriotism, and personal honor have dissolved into shadows. Huston described it as espionage as tragedy, not entertainment. British audiences didn't know what to make of it. The dialogue was cryptic, the pacing funereal, and the morality non-existent. Critics labeled it nihilistic to a fault. But whispers circulated that Huston had drawn on real accounts from disillusioned CIA operatives and British defectors, leading some to believe it was closer to confession than fiction. Behind the scenes, production was plagued by studio interference. 20th Century Fox cut nearly 20 minutes from Huston's original cut after intelligence advisors warned that the film's accuracy bordered on dangerous disclosure. The Kremlin Letter flopped upon release, but grew into a cult favorite decades later. Its realism, once dismissed as alienating, now feels prophetic, a mirror held up to the disillusioned spy culture of the 70s. It proved that in the world of intelligence, the real secret is how easily good men become ghosts. Number 5. The Tamarind Seed, 1974. The Tamarind Seed, directed by Blake Edwards and starring Julie Andrews and Omar Sharif, looked like a romantic drama on the surface. But behind its elegant style lay a piercing Cold War parable about mistrust, moral grayness, and the quiet cost of human connection. Andrews plays Judith Farrow, a British civil servant recovering from a failed relationship, who falls in love with Fyodor Sverdlov, a charming Soviet attaché. Their affair unfolds in Barbados and London, sunlit beaches contrasting with the invisible machinery of espionage closing in. What began as a love story quickly drew political controversy. British officials reportedly objected to Edwards' sympathetic portrayal of a Soviet diplomat. The Foreign Office allegedly demanded minor script changes, claiming the film blurred moral boundaries between East and West. Production tensions didn't help. Andrews, desperate to escape her wholesome image, clashed with Edwards, her husband, over how much vulnerability to display. Sharif, meanwhile, was frustrated by the film's slow pace and dialogue-heavy script. Still, their chemistry carried the film's melancholy heart. Upon release, critics were divided. Some dismissed it as too polished, while others praised its emotional honesty in an era of cynicism. Beneath the glamour, it questioned whether trust could exist in a world designed to destroy it. Over time, The Tamarind Seed became one of the decade's most underrated spy dramas. Its restrained tone, haunting score, and tragic optimism captured something Bond never could: the cost of loving someone you're paid to doubt. Because in the Cold War, even love could be classified. Number 4. A Dandy in Aspic, 1970 reissue. Originally released in 1968, but rediscovered by British audiences in the 70s, A Dandy in Aspic was a masterpiece of fatalism. It starred Lawrence Harvey as Eberlin, a British agent secretly working as a Soviet mole, ordered by his own side to hunt down himself. The film's bleak irony struck nerves in the paranoid climate of the 70s, when revelations about real-life double agents like Kim Philby and George Blake filled headlines. Audiences suddenly saw Eberlin's story not as fantasy, but prophecy. Visually, it's drenched in gray skies and deadpan tension. Eberlin moves through a London that feels drained of life, mirroring his own despair. His cat-and-mouse mission in Berlin unfolds like a requiem, each encounter pushing him closer to self-destruction. Behind the camera, tragedy loomed large. Director Anthony Mann died before filming was complete, leaving Harvey to finish the picture himself. The result is uneven but haunting, part dream, part confession. Censors initially trimmed scenes, implying that British intelligence tolerated corruption among its ranks, but uncut versions later resurfaced in the 70s, adding to its mystique. Critics at the time didn't understand it. They wanted clarity, not existential collapse. Yet, as the decade progressed, A Dandy in Aspic grew into a cult revelation, a study of loyalty's psychological ruin. Today it stands as one of British cinema's most somber achievements. Its final message: in espionage, you can betray your country only once, but yourself forever. Number 3. Scorpio, 1973. Though set partly in America, Scorpio was financed and partly filmed by British studios, making it one of the decade's great transatlantic espionage thrillers. Directed by Michael Winner and starring Burt Lancaster, Alain Delon, and Paul Schofield, it presented the Cold War as a grim duel between killers who no longer understood who they were killing for. Lancaster plays Cross, a veteran CIA operative marked for elimination by his own agency. His assassin, Scorpio, his protege, trained to be faster, colder, and far more loyal to orders than to truth. The British production team infused the film with a restrained melancholy. Gone were the glamour and gadgets replaced by sterile rooms, whispered betrayals, and bureaucratic murder. Critics called it too European for American tastes, while British censors reportedly requested edits to violent interrogation scenes involving British intelligence cooperation. Some insiders claimed the film was pulled early from London theaters after defense officials objected to its depiction of Western agencies trading kills like currency. Behind the scenes, Winner faced studio resistance when he refused to make the film more patriotic. Lancaster, approaching 60, insisted on doing his own stunts to reflect his character's defiance against obsolescence. His exhaustion became the movie's soul. Scorpio didn't explode at the box office. It burned slow, quiet, and devastating. But later, critics hailed it as one of the most honest depictions of Cold War disillusionment. A film about friendship destroyed by systems too powerful to defy. Its message cuts deep. Spies age, regimes change, but betrayal never retires. Number 2. The Looking Glass War, 1970. Based on John le Carré's lesser-known novel, The Looking Glass War exposed espionage as institutional folly, dangerous, bureaucratic, and doomed from the start. It was marketed as a thriller, but played like a eulogy for heroism itself. Starring Anthony Hopkins, Christopher Jones, and Ralph Richardson, the film follows a faded British intelligence department desperate to prove its relevance. When a mysterious photograph suggests Soviet missiles in East Germany, the service recruits an untrained civilian for a suicidal mission. The result isn't triumph, but slow, suffocating disaster. Audiences expecting Bond-style excitement were stunned. Hopkins' portrayal of quiet moral decay hit too close to home for post-Cambridge spy Britain. Censors reportedly demanded dialogue cuts referencing the incompetence of Her Majesty's intelligence apparatus. The government didn't want the world to see its own reflection. Behind the scenes, the film's muted tone divided producers. Director Frank Pearson fought to preserve le Carré's tragic realism, while distributors begged for action sequences. Hopkins, still early in his career, later said it was one of the few roles that left him emotionally unclean. When it premiered, it bombed commercially, but in hindsight, The Looking-Glass War became a touchstone for modern espionage realism, influencing everything from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy to The Constant Gardener. It remains a brutal mirror, one showing that in the Cold War's cruel logic, even truth was expendable. Number 1. The Deadly Affair, 1971. Re-release. When The Deadly Affair re-emerged in British cinemas in 1971, it felt eerily prophetic. Sidney Lumet's 1967 adaptation of John le Carré's Call for the Dead captured a nation unraveling under its own secrets. Its muted re-release, in the wake of real intelligence scandals, cemented it as the decade's definitive forgotten spy tragedy. James Mason stars as Charles Dobbs, an aging MI5 officer investigating the suspicious suicide of a civil servant tied to Soviet contacts. What begins as a simple inquiry spirals into personal betrayal, bureaucratic deceit, and quiet heartbreak. Lumet's London is drained of color, literally. The film's distinctive, desaturated look made the city appear lifeless, as if truth itself were dying. Censors reportedly demanded changes to scenes implying government cover-ups of high-ranking traitors. Rumors even claimed that Le Carré's script revisions were monitored by officials fearing unflattering parallels to real cases. Yet the studio pressed on, releasing the film quietly with little marketing, a mistake that doomed it commercially but gave it mythic afterlife. Behind the camera, Lumet's direction emphasized human decay over heroics. Mason, tired and melancholy, embodied a Britain adrift in moral fog. Critics dismissed it then as too downbeat, but modern viewers see it for what it was, a requiem for integrity in an age of deceit. In a decade where trust was just another code name, The Deadly Affair revealed the only constant in espionage, that the truth is never clean, and loyalty always comes at a human cost. 15 forgotten British spy thrillers, each a mirror reflecting the paranoia, pride, and quiet heartbreak of the 70s. They remind us that espionage isn't about glamour. It's about doubt, identity, and the slow erosion of trust. Which of these hidden gems deserves a comeback? Subscribe for more lost legends of cinema, and tell us which one still haunts you.